So I am Daniel. I'm working to break big telecoms since 2002 or so. Working with open source, of course, with Asterisk and FreeSwitch, we try to provide a bit more flexibility. Related to WebRTC, we do SIP over WebSockets, so we can do signaling. And actually, one of our developers are involved into, that's funny, into specification like SIP over WebSockets. So if you really want to call like between two browsers, you can just use Camarillo in the middle. You don't need anything else, and just should just work fine.
All right, gentlemen, I'm going to ask the first question. With WebRTC not being finalized and there's no mandatory signaling protocol defined, do you find that to be something of a hindrance or a help?
Oh, I think it's joyous. Like the problem with signaling protocols is they always kind of carried over from the last generation. So like my big thing with signaling at the moment is that it's not rich enough to carry the context. So you're seeing, caller ID isn't a fat enough thing to carry all of the web browsing history of your users or all of their, their status or whatever. So the fact that that signaling protocol hasn't been defined allows us to do things that add in the context of the call and make that call a lot richer experience. So I'm entirely in favor of there being no signaling standard.
Yeah, and what's very nice about there not being a specific, someone saying, hey, there's a specific standard, is that you can choose whichever one you want. So for example, if you want to deliver extra context or information over your signaling protocol, you can develop something custom, or you can use whatever you're comfortable with. If you like XMPP, you can use XMPP. In the case of Twilio, we went with SIP as our signaling protocol because it interoperates with the rest of our SIP infrastructure. And that would have made it very difficult if something else would have been mandated as a signaling protocol. But that type of freedom was beneficial to us and beneficial to our customers.
Well, Digium has a long history of supporting just about everything and then inventing our own thing. And so we've sort of done that with what we've done in Bespoke. And it all goes back to exactly what you just said, the fact that there's a lot more information than just the basic caller ID information that you want to move from one point to another. And while there are probably means of trying to do that by standardized signaling formats and protocols, it is in a lot of cases easier to do it with something that you define on your own. So our answer is we do everything because Asterisk will bridge between Bespoke and whatever other channels you might want. But we've created our own for this because it's so much more flexible and it gives us advantages in terms of speed and flexibility in development.
Okay, so signaling-wise, obviously we do only SIP, but I understood the question like, the entire WebRTC specs, like, which involve media, and actually for us, we don't really care about if you want to do SRTP, video, desktop sharing, guys, you're happily routing the packets.
All right, so WebRTC was originally developed as a browser-based technology, but most of the development that we've seen has been on the mobile platform. What are the challenges and limitations of WebRTC in a mobile environment?
Well, mobile is a different life cycle for an application than you get with a desktop application. A browser app, just like any other desktop app, can be fired up at the left and runs constantly, whereas a mobile application is constantly being put in the background, put to sleep, and taken off of its connection to the outside world. So that means you've got to actually build some additional infrastructure in place to make use of something like the push notification services offered by the mobile players in order to make it work right. If you were simply to send a call to a phone where the WebRTC application is sitting in the background, it's going nowhere. You need to actually signal them first via push. Once the application comes up, registers, hopefully very quickly, then it can receive the call. So in the web world, that's not too big of a deal.
Yeah, with the web, you have WebSocket running all the time. In mobile, you have battery concerns, these sorts of things. You don't want a VoIP application, so you can use VoIP push for your mobile concerns. The other end of it, too, is if you realize that the open source code itself was written for the web, it is non-trivial to port that stack to Android and iOS. So Google has certainly been making it easier in like later revs of the iOS and Android type of the native WebRTC SDKs, but it's still a non-trivial implementation to port those into an SDK. And this is where products like Bespoke, Twilio, other players provide as a value-add mobile SDKs for developers, because if you're building a mobile app and you try to wrestle with the native libraries, it's not super simple.
So I'd say there's a little bit of kind of standards boredom that you have to bring in here, which is there are two layers you need to think about. The wire protocol, which is really well defined and actually is pretty suitable for the wire media protocol as defined by the IETF, is pretty suitable for mobile because it's pretty adaptive. Things like Opus is a good codec for mobile because it'll go down to low bit rates, but if you've got good bit rate, then you can use it. Same thing for the video adaption. You can use higher and lower frame rates and different. So those things actually work pretty well on mobile. And ICE and Stun and Turn actually are good platforms for mobile. The other end of it, though, the web browser specific JavaScript is wholly unsuitable for mobile for the reasons that have just been given. But that doesn't mean that you have to go that route. So I think it's you need to think about what layer it is you're worrying about before you kind of answer the question. But yeah, sure, it's a different space and does need a good SDK is really helpful.
So from my opinion, actually, you just have to put everything at the scale of a mobile, because now, if I ask everyone here how many people you have in your contact list, it's like hundreds, thousands, right? So a lot of optimization could be done by just simplifying, let's take the case of like presence. You don't really want to fetch the presence for all these contacts, because you are eventually looking only at one that you want to call, you want to see if it's available and so on. So instead of just doing it for everyone, you have to adapt. So the team said about the codec, but also signaling. There is a lot of improvements that you can do for mobile devices and mobile networks and things like that.
All right. What are some of the technical difficulties you encountered while incorporating WebRTC into your products and/or services, and how did you solve them?
So the running nightmare is the STP. The STP, the first time I saw the blob of STP that Chrome generated, it was, I can't remember how many kilobytes long and entirely incomprehensible. And I've been doing voice for some years, and there were several STP attributes I had never seen before, and there's one I still don't understand. And it's ever changing. Until we actually nail that standard down, it's a constant change. So I end up, in every project I do with WebRTC, I end up taking the STP and parsing it into something I can manage, and then managing it there, stripping it out, changing it, doing whatever I need to do with it, transmitting it, and then re-encoding it. So that's the absolutely biggest pain. It takes me more time than anything else. I can do the crypto in half the time it takes me to mess with the STP. So, yeah. You were expecting that, weren't you?
We've encountered similar types of issues. This is when you want to do re-invites, or if Tim and I are in a call and we want to add Steve to the call, you are now adding an additional leg. So with the current offer answer model within WebRTC, it's like you need to re-invite everybody in to update the call. So from a developer developing on native WebRTC, this is a high challenge. As Tim has said, you have to parse SDP. There's a lot of work that goes into solving that. The way we expose that to our developers is we have what we call a conversations object. So we think this is like a more rational model for thinking about, rather than like I pick up a phone call and I make a call. That's kind of how WebRTC works natively. I'm sending a call to this person and doing an offer and answer between two endpoints. But it doesn't scale very nicely into the multi-party scenarios. So we wanted to think N-way conversations first. We want to think multi-party first. So the way we solve that technically is we create a conversations object, which is, just think of it like a conference, and you just add legs to the conference. So from a developer's perspective, working with the Twilio SDK, if you have 2 people in a call and you want to add a 3rd person, it's completely as simple of just saying, add this person to this conversation, and now you have a 3-way call, rather than under the hood, we're renegotiating all of those sessions.
I would say the mobile components seem to be rather a complexity for us. Not an insurmountable one by any means, and we now have mobile SDKs. But when you've been looking at this from a browser-first perspective, and you start to sit down and look at what all challenges you have to face that are already covered by the browsers, that actually does, as Billy mentioned, sort of rise to the surface as, wow, this is going to be a lot more work. The way we've built things out, building for scale wasn't, again, insurmountable, but it was one of those things that you have to think about ahead of time. If you're trying to build a one-off WebRTC server, it's reasonably simple and straightforward. If you're trying to build something that can cluster up to hundreds of thousands of concurrent live endpoints, that's a different question. So some of those things came into mind.
Well, probably I'm the only one that doesn't have really big issues, because it was more like just a transport layer. We can get even bigger SDPs, could be something else because we don't care about. So the thing that it was solving for us was by the specs mandating the security, actually we got less problems, especially with the mobile networks where SIP was blocked. Now everything is encrypted, TLS has to be there. So I would see like a really good evolution from us as a just middle node. We don't really need to understand big SDPs or whatsoever. That's fine. The trouble was a lot of carriers or whatsoever, they were blocking signaling, and then the problem came to you, or they were using ALG. Now that's solved, so I'm really happy, and I'm glad to just use WebRTC.
All right, so what are your thoughts on the future of WebRTC, and how do you think ORTC is going to affect that?
So I see ORTC as a slow step towards fixing the SDP mistake. It shouldn't. We should have started with that, but that's history. There are reasons why we didn't, and some of them reasonably good. But so I think ORTC is good. It's great to have Microsoft in the fold. I think that is going to shift, particularly the web developers' viewpoint. And saying 3 out of 4 browsers is pretty good. All we need is Apple now, and then actually there will be a storm of people just using this. So I think that's the only hesitation I have is ORTC. The APIs are fine, but there's some niggling doubt in my mind that they're going to implement everything in terms of the wire protocol. So for me, the wire protocol is the critical issue, and I really hope that they implement that, codecs and all.
Yeah, I think overwhelmingly ORTC is a positive thing. It's somewhat has a negative just from a branding connotation of, I think all 5 of us were hanging out at ClueCon, and there's a 20-minute presentation on ORTC, and the first person raised their hand and they asked a question. They said, okay, can you tell me the difference between ORTC and WebRTC? And it's like, well, we just spent 20 minutes telling you what that was. So I think what's nice is the ORTC guys have said, hey, kind of think of it as WebRTC 1.1. I think that's a lot easier to parse for the average person. It's not something to worry about a whole lot. It's the next iteration. As Tim said, it provides a lot of enhancements. Especially what's very nice is in the use case of broadcast. So the current model expects that we're both sharing video. It's going both ways. But ORTC doesn't care about that. So I could have one endpoint that's receiving video streams from, let's say, 1,000 video cameras. And ORTC makes it a lot easier to send that one-way video, and this endpoint's consuming it from all of these other ones. That's much, much simpler in the ORTC model. It is extremely exciting to have Microsoft on board. Twilio's been working with Microsoft. If you go to today, you can go to dev.microsoft.ie, and there is a Twilio demo on the Microsoft site that allows you to use a phone number to call using Twilio client on ORTC. So we've already written an ORTC shim. And to get a little bit more technical about it, there's differences in the ORTC APIs and the WebRTC APIs. But the way ORTC is designed is such that you can just write a shimming layer and use your existing WebRTC API. So using existing Twilio WebRTC client product, we just use this little shim, and now it works on Microsoft Edge. So you can download the developer version of Microsoft Edge, and Twilio client works in it today. And I think that is very exciting that you have products working in Chrome, Firefox, and Microsoft. Apple now seems like the laggards.
You know, on a technical level, I think it's a nice, sort of small step forward. I think that it gives you lower level control than you have with the current WebRTC APIs. And for some very small subset of people, probably many of whom are in this room, that will be an important thing. So I think that in the future, this will have a solid impact on the sorts of folks that are doing low-level communications development. I think that for the vast majority of web developers, who are the people we're still trying to get to step up to the plate and actually start to use this on a wholesale basis, it probably doesn't make a whole lot of difference. There will always be some sort of shim layer over top that relates between the two. Go ahead, Tim.
I was just going to say, have you seen the face of a web developer when they watch this SDP blob go past on their, like it makes them, literally makes people walk away.
But do they have, is that supposed to look at that or not?
It turns up in the Chrome console. It's like, it's honestly, it's.
Yeah, I admit, but the idea was to hide all this, no matter it's okay, it's ugly, I understand, and we don't do SDP, we don't care about that. But the idea of hiding this was supposed to be done. Now, if you turn developer tools, I understand that you can see a lot of things, and even if you look on the wire, could be even more ugly with some, encryption and so that you try to look at. So yeah, I agree. The only concern I have is, adding a bit of confusion to the market, like waiting or not waiting, is going to happen, is not going to happen, is not 1.0 out, and they are doing 1.1. Otherwise, again, we are proxy guys, do whatever you want with media.
All right, so as we all know, WebRTC is bleeding edge. Things change, new releases of Chrome. How do you balance keeping a production system up and running with these bleeding edge changes coming out?
Well, we've been reasonably lucky in that they actually don't come out just randomly. They come out in a rather controlled way, and all of the browsers actually have at least 2 stages of pre-release version that you can actually get a hold of and play with before it actually flows to the vast majority of people. So that in Chrome, there's Chrome Canary, and then there's Chrome Beta before it actually becomes the standard. So we've been able to basically fiddle our adapter.js components as needed by watching what breaks on the builds as those pre-release versions update. So while it's not pleasant, it's not been as horrible as it could have been. And I think the browser guys have done an admirable job of making it easier on all of us by doing it that way.
I would say WebRTC isn't the bleeding edge, it's the today. So Twilio has had a WebRTC product in production since 2012. We are on pace to do a 1 billion minutes of WebRTC minutes this year. So this isn't like some kind of edge thing that people don't use in production. When you call Hulu, when you call Home Depot, when you call Shopify, when you call Wix, all of those calls go to a WebRTC. Their customer support is all run on WebRTC. So these are production products for business critical applications when they're doing customer conversations and support conversations, and it's in production and it's stable and it's usable. So this is something that's large businesses and enterprises are using today. And as Steve is saying, on the Twilio side, we do a lot of testing. At the Google WebRTC show, the Cranky Geek show that was recently in SF, one of our product managers, Rob, he described all of Twilio's automated testing, and that's a cool video you can check out on YouTube. So we do a lot of automated testing to catch things to make sure that our product is up to speed. But for our customers, they're using it in production and relying on it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to look at it. That if you're using an API, a vendor in this space, then you should be able to rely on them doing that. And the only kind of thing that I would flag as a danger point is that because these things do change, if you have a vendor who loses interest in that product and ceases to update it, then quite rapidly, within about 6 or 8 weeks, you'll have something that doesn't work. And particularly in this run up to the final standardization, I think we're going to see another round of changes in the browsers as they match up with some of the security requirements in particular. So you'll see that Chrome won't accept WebRTC calls unless it's over the page was loaded over HTTPS, for example. And that will be coming in the next couple of months. That's going to break some demos. It shouldn't break any production code. Because if any of you have got production code that isn't over HTTPS, you've got other problems. But so those kinds of changes you can expect. And so I think you do, we have got another round of slight nervousness coming. But yeah, I mean, it's in Facebook. So it's not new stuff.
So from my point of view, I see it also as a simplification because we are in telephony and every, new phones were coming to the market and a lot of troubles to really test it and see it's working with your platform and so on. So I see it as a plus. We'll have to support, 4 vendors, big vendors, but I see it also like a problem because everyone gets locked here because now a web browser is not something that you can actually develop like even like a SIP phone, It's really a big application and that from some point of view, it's a bit concerning. From support point of view, I see it like simplification when the specs are stable and not really flowing like now.
So I just follow one thing up on that, which is about the web browser. You're absolutely right. Nobody without a huge budget can build a new web browser. But the wire protocol for WebRTC is implementable by probably 1 or 2 individuals in a few months. So it is possible to build something that's WebRTC compatible in a small team.
So we've touched on the subject of new developers coming to WebRTC and getting scared of things like the SDP. What's some advice that you would give somebody new that has never touched WebRTC?
Learn some assembler.
Twilio has some great SDKs for you that are very developer friendly.
I knew
Sorry,
that one was coming.
Actually, David Duffett's gonna no commercialism. So, so for the no commercialism hat on, if you're a web developer and you do want to hack from the perspective of WebRTC, it is. I think so. I think it's coming in with eyes open. It's realizing that it's non-trivial and there are some things to manage, and perhaps for like a subset of the population, that's a valuable thing that you would want to manage yourself. I think it's getting engaged with WebRTC is probably a lot like getting engaged with Asterisk. You want to be involved in the mailing list. You want to be involved in the community. There's a lot of great community in SF. We have a meetup. I think they do one in New York. They do one in Stockholm. So Google's got a great bug tracker. The guys over there are terrific at running the project, and I think it's stepping up to the commitment, kind of like saying, oh, I'm going to be part of the Asterisk community and I want to engage in it. Okay, if I'm a developer and I want to be involved in WebRTC, it's realizing that I want to bite off this effort. That's the kind of advice I would give.
I've got to say that while it is non-trivial, it's not anywhere near as non-trivial as sort of coming up to speed with Asterisk. Or FreeSwitch or Camellia or any of these systems that we're accustomed to. So it is at least something that's within the realm of most developers' capabilities if they take the time to go through this normal process. And in this day and age, there are so many sort of things out there to help you develop applications, from online documentation to libraries that already exist, and of course, services like ours. So there's not really any good excuse to say that this is too difficult or too complex.
So I'd say key advice to a developer is to think about what the benefit for your user is, and do not think you're implementing a telephone. Like, they have plenty of telephones. We do not need another telephone embedded in your web browser. You certainly don't need one in your mobile because you've got 2 or 3 already in there, right? So you really need to think about what it is the benefit for the user is. And the nice thing about hiring web developers is that they don't really care about phones. And most of them refuse to use them anyway. Like, phoning web developers is a losing battle. So I would really strongly encourage you to think about what it is that the users want from it, and then turn that into the app, and then start thinking about how you're going to make it work. So, you know, real classic prototyping, drawing on the board, working out what the workflow is, and then bringing in the context so the user has a real benefit. So there's a reason why they're doing this, not ringing the 800 number.
I'm going to take some questions from the audience. Anybody have any questions?
So right at the beginning, everyone was enthusiastic about the fact that there's no standardized signaling protocol, but surely that's... Now, it does your head in to imagine how you would signal interoperability between applications which incidentally do communications, but aren't we going to end up really with silos?
That's a good question.
Right. I keep saying this, but at the Y level, the media is interoperable. Well, like we got that bit absolutely down pat, and it's pretty good. I think how we get around the federation issue is essentially what you're talking about. It is a genuine problem, and I think we've reached high watermark of silos. I think there's particularly in Europe, there is pressure for moving back out into smaller, more localized, more responsible data storage units. It's not happening yet, but I think we've hit the peak of concentration, and we're going to start coming down the other side. And at that point, you need federation. So you need solutions like Matrix, who are working on this, or you need a good SIP federation, or you need some other. I have an interest in this, but actually in the IoT space rather than voice. But in terms of producing a secure identity that is portable across multiple platforms. That isn't there yet. I mean, Matrix have a solution, other people have solutions, but I don't think there's one that's like obviously right. But I think we will end up in that direction, but it'll take a few years.
I'll throw out that while you wind up with gardens, silos, they're not nearly as walled as they once were. I mean, the point of federation for this is the web, by and large. And there are examples where people have broken that, especially using native mobile applications. But doing the standard functions of web communications, you're able to actually access it by simply going to the web page for whoever it is you're trying to communicate with. Now, there's something to be said for the fact that the user experience is whatever they dictate versus whatever you're accustomed to. And I think that maybe having some sort of lowest common denominator function isn't a bad idea. But I think that there's an awful lot of good that comes from being able to let a developer choose exactly what that experience is, and then tailor that into the sort of contextual flow that goes with the rest of their application.
Yeah, I'm a little bit torn, Tim, between your idea that don't make this a telephone, but yes, federation is good. And so I don't think federation is necessary, and in fact, could even be harmful. And the reason is you should not think of WebRTC as a telephone. So the value here that is coming out of this new technology is not that I can do the same thing I've been doing for 150 years. It's that something new emerges out of the stack. It's that you can add context to your communications. And so the idea is, like, from my mobile app, if I'm calling the airlines, instead of clicking on a number, and I leave the airlines mobile app and I go over to this other app, the telephone app, and I've lost all that contact. And what's the first thing that happens? You pick up the agent picks up the phone, they say, okay, welcome to Delta Airlines. What's your customer number? And I have to pipe in my 5,000 digit customer number, and they're like, what do you need help with? And it's like, well, I was just in your mobile app. Like, shouldn't you just know what I was doing? But what if I didn't have to leave the app, right? What if, like, from within that app, I could just say, okay, I want to change a flight. And then it made a call in the app. And then when the agent gets it, they receive that context. And it says, like, oh, hello, Mr. Chia. I see that you want to change your flight. You're on this flight number. Do you want to change to this flight number? And then they can push it to me, and I can see that context all in the app while we're having the voice communication or the video communication, right? So this greater thing emerges of tying context to your communications. And once you start, like, that's a beautiful experience. And I only need that experience within that application. And there's not really a need for me to say, I'm using WhatsApp, but I want to call my airlines because I don't book my flight from that. You know, it's this idea that it doesn't need to federate. And when you federate and you go down to the lowest common denominator and you wash away all that context, then you just have a telephone.
Hold on.
So you do need some kind of... Yeah, so, I mean, it's a good example because when you're booking flights, maybe if you've got a frequent flyer card, you care, but otherwise you don't care which airline is going to carry you quite often. So you're using some kind of agnostic booking app. Now, you want to have that interaction with lots of airlines, so which means, I guess, the federation question isn't primarily a WebRTC federation, it's an application level federation, which maybe is your point.
So I just want to, part of this discussion is to do with the fact that we're stuck with, there was only one way of communicating. And so now there are different sets of use cases that have different requirements. And Billy's quite right, there are some of them where federation gives you no benefit at all, and there are others which do. And we need to start actually siloing the way we think about apps. So we think about how communication is done in terms of what the user wants and what benefits we're trying to bring them. And we will find that some of them need federation, and some of them don't, and some of them need localized federation. And so we're going to split this out into stop being one monolithic solution, and there'll be a series of different solutions. And we've always historically been really good at that on the internet.
Yeah, I see
like
it
that
also.
better.
Yeah, I see it actually as something complementary to telephony, actually, or, you know, in many cases, you don't really need to federate. Like, you go to your bank anyhow with an application on a website, so there you just need... why I don't see it's going to replace telephony in federation is because, I mean, I'm a programmer. I will not really trust any kind of JavaScript to call whatsoever unknown person, because we know that the browser has access to a lot of information. Now, with the application, if we speak to the mobile, sometimes we started to hate, you know, you look now, there are, I don't know, 100 carriers for, you know, flying out there, and don't really want to put all the application always, right? So even now I was across US to a couple of cities, and I couldn't use the same airline because there are not good connections, and I ended up with, just for the check-in, with tens or whatsoever application. Of course, you can remove them. So I still think that some kind of, you know, anonymous contact, you still need to be, you know, reachable by anyone out there, but not always. So it's, again, not telephony at the end of the day. It's just complementary in many aspects.
It's Dan York back here, and I'm kind of going to go off that same kind of question because I definitely see the value, having spent a long time in the SIP world, of not specifying the signaling protocol, because it does allow the innovation to go and try different things. But my big worry is that we're seeing a case where we are again getting into siloed walls of messaging for some of the different spaces. For instance, when I want to go use Firefox Hello, okay, I don't have a central directory. All right, I have to go find somebody, or I have to send a link to somebody through another mechanism. If for any of the messaging apps to work, one of the key issues is how do you have the directory? How do you have the user directory in some way, shape, or form? And this is what makes the good messaging apps, you know, thrive really well. That's why people use Skype. That's why people use some of these other, that's why Facebook is using a lot of that, because it's the directory that people have. And so that's one of these big challenges that I see. I totally get your point, Billy, that for specialized applications, WebRTC is a wonderful enabler of that. And the directory doesn't matter in the Delta, you know, in the airline app instance, because you're already communicating with the agents, you're doing something like that. To your point, Tim, that's an instance where it doesn't matter, because you're getting into the, you know, a direct kind of thing where the signaling protocol could be anything, you know, whatever we want to do. But I guess my worry is that and maybe, Tim, you're saying, what I hear you saying is we should just let it evolve, and out of all of this, there'll be some kind of, common protocol that will emerge. But for some of the WebRTC messaging that's happening, what I would love to see is I'd love to see there be this way that if I'm in Google's thing and I want to communicate with somebody else who's in Firefox or in something else, I want to be able to do that without having to use another out-of-band messaging mechanism to pass the link along. Anyway, it comes back to directory for me and some of how these services will evolve.
I'll bite somewhat, and I don't know if this is completely the direction you're going, but if you look at the messaging apps, the ones you put on your screen during the keynote, and you have WhatsApp, Viber, Line, Kik, Facebook Messenger, all of these different apps, why have they all emerged, right? Aren't they all just doing about the same thing? Well, not really. The reality is that each one of those has a different community. They have a bit of a different user experience. They even provide different features. So for example, WeChat, I can buy stickers in WeChat, and that's very popular, and it's important for that community, but Kik doesn't do that, and Kik is very important with teenagers. So the reason why these apps have emerged is because somebody said, I can do something better. And I can be doing something better enough that it hits an addressable market in a way that addresses their pain points or delights them and makes that valuable for them. And so they want that different messenger. And so then we come along and we say, oh, but wouldn't it be just great if I just had some way to talk to everybody, and if everybody just had it, and it was maybe already on their phone, and it was kind of ubiquitous, and we could all just talk to each other. And it's like, why don't you send an SMS? Like
Well,
we have that, or a phone call, right?
Yeah,
So-
but to your point, though, they go to Kik or they go to wherever because that's where their friends are. You build up that mass, because you go where the conversations are. So, we look at any number of these apps that are out there, and many of us rush and try the latest bright shiny, right? Because we like it, it's cool. And so we go there, but the reality is we don't necessarily stay there because that's not where the people we communicate with are. I was a big user of Wire. I am still. But the people I regularly communicate with aren't on it. So it has to build that user directory again. Anyway, Sam, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say the big risk with Federation is spam, right? The reason that the landline is dead is that I only ever get phone calls from liars, cheats, and my father-in-law. Like, those are the only people who ever use my landline. And there's only one of them I want to speak to, right? And the same is true for email, right? That the email, I can't tell you how much spam I get from. I even got a Russian warehouse, a carpet warehouse spamming me. I mean, and that's the downside of Federation. Open Federation without some incredibly good authentication at the far end is just painful. And that's what's driven that's the core feature of all of these messaging apps, is you don't get spam from people who aren't your friends, and when you do, you unfriend them or block them. And that you can't do that without strong authentication.
All right. So I've got one last question, and then we'll wrap it up. I would like to know what you guys have seen implemented with WebRTC that's unique and unthought of previously before seeing that.
So I saw something last week that was absolutely brilliant. All right, and it's a really simple thing. And this guy was wearing a shirt with a pattern on it, minimalist QR code. And when he was on WebRTC, it had a video on it. So it replaced the QR code with a video. And the trick is, and I talked to him afterwards, this could be a sports app, right? So this guy is about to score a goal, yeah? And then you bid for who's going to be on his shirt on TV.
I've seen a lot of clever stuff. A few of them come to mind. IBM is a Twilio partner, and they created a really cool app using Twilio video. A call came. It was a call between a doctor and a patient, and they talk over Twilio video. And what IBM does is the app is hosted on IBM Bluemix. It takes the audio portion of media, pipes that into Bluemix, and ties it into IBM Watson, which then does the speech recognition and turns it into text, and does like sentiment analysis. So you can tell whether like the patient you're talking to is like happy or sad, or they're getting frustrated with the conversation. And then it live transcribes what the doctor is saying, and then like medical terms or jargon within the app can like be popped out and defined. So you're having a video call with your doctor, and your doctor who's like completely unintelligible, like you get a script of what they're saying, and you actually know what they're saying. So I thought that was pretty clever. And then as like a non-Twilio use case, I think one of the cool ones I've seen was a data channel-based CDN, essentially, that allowed you to do like basically hosting content that you're sharing all in a browser-based peer-to-peer network with no servers. So you have a browser, and literally the browser is the web server serving that content to anybody else in the peer network. And I thought that was very clever, all over data channel.
There's this one gentleman who built an application that allows people to keep track of their pets in real time. And that's that was a joke at Tim's expense. Although he actually built a very clever application that did exactly that. And the idea of serving markets that aren't otherwise served is something that I had not really given a great deal of consideration to coming from the telephony world. We look at things in terms of very large-scale solutions for the most part. And WebRTC, for the first time, gives people the opportunity to build micro ecosystems that this sort of goes back to the comment we were having earlier, or the conversation earlier, that serve a very specific and very small niche audience. So I can't think of anything else off the top of my head that's enormously innovative, but I know that there are plenty of things out there. Daniel?
Yeah, so actually, I think, again, being like a SIP guy, that WebRTC actually reveals the power of SIP as any other signaling protocol, because, and I'll have an example of an app, all these years, we were stuck to this user interface, 10 digits dial plan or whatsoever, dial pad and so on, no interaction between, the service provider and the end users. Like now all the phones have tons of options. There are some management or provisioning options, but those are not easy. And interaction between the service, I now provide you presence, so I'll enable that for you, or it will push your notification to you so you can see how you can do it. So all these kind of lessons we learn with SIP, it's extensible. You can do any kind of session. It was not possible, and everyone associated with SIP. So actually, Peter Dunkley, one of our developers that actually developed WebSockets in Kamailio, so this is the foundation for WebRTC for signaling. The first demo was doing with SIP was like a tic-tac-toe. So good guys, you can do more than just voice video with SIP. So it enables everything you can do with this kind of protocol that people just associated with, telephony, because the endpoints were, not flexible at all.
All right, I'd like to thank our panel. Does anybody else have anything to add? All right, thank you guys.